judge there decided that it was indirect discrimination, essentially saying it did not matter whether you knew someone had a gender identity or not. The fact that they had one, you interacting with that person effectively in a way they didn't like, that was enough to class as indirect discrimination, which that in itself is very chilling. It's basically the story of the Sex Discrimination Act. It started as something for women and it has turned into a piece of legislation that is now being used against women. And that it's now a piece of legislation that can be used to punish us. But this is what happens with pretty much everything gender ideology touches. It turns it into the direct opposite of what it intended to be. We see that with free speech organizations, any organizations set up specifically for women, then becoming organizations used specifically to punish women. In a sense, the fight has only just begun, which is terrifying to think of when you're so exhausting, quite a seasoned turf at this point.
In 2022, women's social media app Giggle found itself embroiled in a legal battle after biological male Tickle claimed he'd been unlawfully discriminated against when he was banned from the platform. Though Tickle ultimately won his case, CEO of Giggle, Sall Grover, who I'm delighted to welcome today, maintains that the ban was not an act of discrimination, but a necessary step in protecting women's spaces. Sal, thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
So the court first heard this case in 2024 when it was found that Tickle had been indirectly discriminated against. Now we just heard a few days ago that you've lost your appeal in that decision. But not only that, the charge has been elevated from indirect discrimination to direct discrimination, and the criminal damages that are owed to Tickle have gone from $10,000 to $20,000. Can you explain the reasoning behind that decision?
Well, the reasoning is quite bizarre and needs a slight amount of context. So in the last decision in Tickle v. Giggle, so the first round, it was, the judge there decided that it was indirect discrimination, essentially saying it did not matter whether you knew someone had a gender identity or not. The fact that they had one, you interacting with that person effectively in a way they didn't like, that was enough to class as indirect discrimination, which that in itself was very chilling. In this case, so obviously I was appealing that decision, but then Tickle did what is called a cross appeal. He was also appealing that decision. And I was always quite baffled as to why, you won, why are you appealing the decision you won? And there was money. He wanted the damages increased significantly. So I thought, is this just a way to do that? But if you lose, it would be absurd. And I was never that concerned with the cross appeal, to be honest, because it was so ludicrous. That was the part of the case. But in court, they argued that because in a photograph, in his onboarding photograph to use Giggle, Tickle was wearing a V-neck t-shirt and had shoulder-length hair and the face of a man, that these were all protected characteristics of being a trans woman. And I just thought that was so absurd. How on earth could any judge in the world think that made any sense? So, to be perfectly honest, I really wasn't. I was just thinking that there's just no way. And I don't think I'm naive in the sense I know how crazy this ideology is. But I thought maybe we could get one judge to believe such nonsense, but 3 judges. And that's why there's 3. It's the buffer. It's supposed to be the barrier between, basically bullshit and the right way of doing things. And so when the judges announced that the cross appeal was successful, I just was in complete shock, because I just went this means 2 things. It means that a piece of clothing essentially has more rights in Australia than an actual woman. A V-neck t-shirt has more rights than an actual woman. But so does looking like a man, which is now a protected characteristic of being a trans woman. Looking like a man has more rights than being an actual woman in Australia. That's how it plays out. That's what the law is now saying. And when Equality Australia, which is I would argue, probably the biggest LGBTQI plus organization in Australia, not quite a Stonewall UK, but very, very similar. They got their start campaigning for same-sex marriage, actually, and then obviously won that, and then pivoted to intervening in court cases to say sex is a spectrum and that men can be lesbians. When they left court after the decision, they were joyous because they said direct discrimination makes it easier for trans people to make discrimination claims and win them. So make of that what you will. I mean, there was obviously something here by design where there was that this is exactly what they've wanted to have happen.
Obviously, this is such a historic case. This is the first time that an Australian federal court has had to rule about what a woman is. For those who are unaware about Australian law when it comes to gender, can you explain a bit about the Sex Discrimination Act and those 2013 amendments and how they played into your case?
Okay, so Australia's Sex Discrimination Act was enacted in 1984, which was quite just a coincidental year, all things considering. And it's a direct response to Australia becoming a signatory of CEDAW in 1983. So CEDAW is the UN Convention of the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women and Girls. It has 187 signatories around the world. The UK is one, the US, like all major countries. The only countries that haven't signed it are the bad ones, basically, the really, really bad ones. And it's just basically a commitment to, eliminate discrimination against women and girls. It's very much, this document is very much based in biology and reality, because a lot of discrimination against women and girls stems from our biology and this specific biology track we go through, journey we go through in life. And so Australia has always been in a unique position to defend CEDAW because you could sort of say we did like a copy and paste of it straight into our Sex Discrimination Act and then enacted it into law. It's very significantly there. Not all countries have really put it into law. They just have a commitment to ensure their legislation reflects it, but CEDAW itself is not as strongly in there. But Australia and New Zealand both have a real, it plays a real part in our legislation. What happened and so this was all working quite fine. Then in 2013, under Julia Gillard's government, our first female prime minister, who has dined out on that for over a decade, and who, incidentally, on May 25th, will be speaking at a panel at the Hay Festival in the UK on women in politics, and the misogyny and sexism that women face in politics. So good luck to her on that. She brought in amendments to the Sex Discrimination Act that actually eliminated the definition of male and woman and put in gender identity. But there's possibility that she really didn't know, and a lot of people didn't, sort of the good actors in there didn't know what was happening, because there actually isn't evidence that Parliament intended for this to happen. We can get into sort of what there is evidence of what they intended. Were there bad actors that just sort of didn't put it into writing of what the intention was? I suspect maybe there was. I think that I do suspect it. I mean, I think this is about gender ideology in a whole. I think it's always been an attack on women's rights. So somebody wanted this to happen. But whether it was specifically Gillard, I don't think so. There's no evidence. So these amendments basically have turned this piece of very clear legislation into something very muddled. And it's not like it's been working well the whole time. The first women-focused businesses to come under attack were women-only gyms, because these are obviously local small businesses who, let's say they're not, let's say a business like, say, something like an online space where you're dealing with people from all around the world. You're dealing with people in a certain area. So they were very vulnerable in a sense to these men who claimed to women coming in, demanding access. The gym owners would say, obviously, like, no, this is women only. They would go to the AHRC, file a identity discrimination complaint. The gym would then be ordered to pay $20,000 with a solicitor. They get it down to $10,000. They wouldn't go to court with it because it's well over $1 million in legal fees to do it. So there was this intimidation tactic that was happening for lots of different women's spaces around the country for over a decade, in silence and stealth. I've just spoken to a lot of people now over the years that it happened to. There's no media attention on it. It was just everyone was suffering in silence. When it happened to me, there's no sort of great story of bravery or anything. It was I had spent enough time by this point. I'd already been brought into the fight because I'd been in it for about 2 years off the back of creating Giggle. By the time it was court time, I just spent enough time acquainting myself, getting myself familiar with what the women in the UK would do. And when I got the Australian Human Rights Commission complaint, I studied what was happening with crowdfunding and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, I think maybe I could do this. And so it was really just emulating the amazing work of women in the UK and thinking, I think we could make this fly down here. And also because I was like, it's either I shut the app down like completely, I just give up, like that's it, or I fight. And for lots of different reasons, I wanted to fight. So it's basically the story of the Sex Discrimination Act. It started as something for women and then has turned into a piece of legislation that is now being used against women. We have been effectively cut out of it, and that it's now a piece of legislation that can be used to punish us. This is what happens with pretty much everything gender ideology touches. It turns it into the direct opposite of what it intended to be. We see that with free speech organizations, any organizations set up specifically for women, then becoming organizations used specifically to punish women. So yeah, it's just, in that sense, Australia is absolutely no different to how this is played out in the rest of the world. The only main difference appears to be that Australian institutions and politicians seem to be utterly convinced that we can make gender ideologies successful here. And I think they're wrong. Obviously they're winning some battles along the way, but I actually think that they won't win the war.
It will come as no surprise that all of us at Spiked love Rod Liddle, and we're certain that you will too. Every Saturday morning from 10 a.m, Rod takes over Times Radio for 3 hours of spiky conversation, humour and opinion, always confronting topics head on. Rod poses the big questions to big-name interviewees, ones that won't just give you the same line you've heard everywhere else. And it's not all heavy lifting. You'll also get music recommendations from leading artists and the weekly TV review, which tells you exactly what to watch and what to avoid. Join Rod Liddle on Times Radio, Saturdays from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m, on digital radio, on your smart speaker, or by downloading the free Times Radio app. I wonder if you could expand on that a bit and talk about what it's felt like for you being at the forefront of this movement in Australia, because you mentioned the UK there. We've had the Supreme Court ruling last year. We have that definition of biological sex in law, even if it's not yet being perfectly enacted. What's your experience been on the ground in Australia? Do you have much backing from politicians, from the people around you? How would you compare it to the situation in the UK?
So I first came into this fight in 2020 because we were in the beta testing stages of Giggle. It hadn't properly been launched yet. I didn't know anything. We didn't create the app in response to this or anything. We were just getting ready to launch it. I woke up one morning and I was completely under attack. And I'd never heard the word TERF before. I'd never been called a transphobe. I had no idea why why it was happening, basically. I then, through just, Googling what a TERF was, that's where I found like Julie Bindel and Helen Joyce and Kelly J. Keane and Jane Clare Jones and Graham Linehan, like these really prominent UK voices who were speaking out about this. And you have that moment of like, what on earth are they talking about? Like, this can't possibly be true. This is like insane. And then you go and you do more research and you go, oh, well, they're not telling a word of a lie. And so, like, as a startup, we decided to tread water because I thought that this will blow over. I still didn't know how long they'd actually been fighting for, that this had been quite a long time already in 2020. And so we decided to just, basically just tread water. I was like, it'll blow over and then we'll just be able to continue on and run a woman-only space. I was trying to bring attention to the fact that we had come under attack, but no media would speak to me. Every business that or sort of organizational business partner that we had in the launch and going forward all left us, like to the point of like never answering an email ever again. Our media that we had lined up before we came under attack to this day has never responded to me. And so I was like, okay, something really sinister and crazy is going on. And through the court case, the Australian Human Rights Commission complaint, the first round of the court case, and then the appeal, it is literally only this week. So I've been in this fight now for 6.5 years. I'm in the court case for 4.5 years. It is only this week that there is a political conversation happening in Australia that reflects anything that has happened in the past, definitely say 4.5 years in the UK. It's wild. And it's not obviously not just me. There's so many women in Australia who have been fighting and being vocal to bring attention to this issue. But for parents of children who are caught up in this, is obviously like everywhere else, so many children caught up in it. Lots of detransitioners who are coming out, and just nothing. Like the sheer cruelty of Australia's media and coercive has been quite astounding. I think it's always the contradiction I find, that they're always talking about minorities, but then suddenly for the likes of detransitioners, they could care less about. It's just utterly heartbreaking. So the only silver lining that has come out of the court decision last week is that there is a much needed political discussion that is finally being had, that, to be quite frank, evidently would not have been happening had we not had this book case. Or it would have taken something way down the line, and we're talking about so much carnage between now and whenever that may be, that it's just horrific to even think about. So while the decision is horrific and I hate it and I wish it was different, I mean, I wish so many things were different, we can look at, okay, we've finally got political pushback. We can now capitalize on that, and that's what we're going to have to do. In a sense, the fight has only just begun, which is terrifying to think of when you're so exhausted and quite a seasoned turf at this point.
What I find really interesting there is you say you've never heard of the word turf before this all kicked off. I wonder, when you started Giggle, when you started a women's only app, if it ever occurred to you that an incident like this could happen.
It's not like I had been living under a rock. Like, I'd heard there was now a T in the LGBT, and I was like, cool, I trust those guys. Like, whatever that great, that good for them. They must know what they're doing. And like, before I moved back into Australia in 2018, like, I'd spent time in New York. But I really missed this. Like, I just did. I was in LA and New York. This just didn't come up. But I was very much like, I was online. I didn't post or tweet or anything like that, but I was very much post 2016 in that political bubble on, say, Twitter, where it was like how did Trump win? Probably like an element of Trump derangement syndrome that so many of us once had, and then the left ate us too, and we went, oh, hang on, that's how we won. And so, like, I honestly did not know that this was happening. And we've talked about it so many times over the years, like my family and I, we've laughed of like, what are the odds of creating an online platform exclusively for women in the one time in human history when everyone's pretending they don't know what a woman is? Like, in 2020, when we were getting ready to launch, had we launched the app just 8 years earlier, there would have been absolutely no problem. And so right there just shows you that this is a zeitgeist thing. This is a fad. This is not actually some situation where men are actually becoming women in any way, shape, or form. This is just, I think, a momentary blip on culture that a lot of people are absolutely clowning themselves over, whether it's the judiciary, journalists, or politicians, trying to appease these people who in 10 years, probably a lot of them will move on to the next fad when this really falls out of favor with the mainstream public.
You've said previously that you want all women and girls to be able to say no to a man without punishment. And when you put it like that, it seems like a very clear-cut issue. I wonder if you have much hope that Australia's political class will eventually turn around and see this issue as you do, which is a matter of sex-based rights.
As I said, in a way, the fight's only just begun. So it's really, really interesting how this plays out. You know, we're 2 years out from a federal election, almost to the day. We're 2 years out from the federal election. So we've got 2 years to either, and I would hope that within that 2 years we could get the current government to do something. And that really is the responsibility of the opposition government right now. which I think if they actually wanted to prove to the Australian people that they were actually listening and trying to get something done, this is a great opportunity to do it, because you can't lose on this. No one thinks men are weak. This is not popular outside of these tiny little bubbles of people who work in HR. And so if the opposition government realized that actually they would be quite celebrated if they did something that really helped the day-to-day lives of women, girls, and parents in general, because you've got mums and dads who are dealing with daughters who don't want to go to the bathroom at school, who are not drinking water at school. There are girls who are not going to school for the week they have their period. We've got girls who are having to compete against boys in sport. And are losing obviously opportunities, exactly how it's happening everywhere else. So if the opposition government actually got its shit together and worked with sort of the rising political party, which is One Nation, joining forces on this issue, and went, okay, we're going to essentially humiliate the government, because to me it's a slam dunk. You just go, say what a woman is, they won't say it. You go, okay, well, what else are you lying about? Let's have a look. If you say men can be women, all you're doing is proving that you will happily tell a lie. So, and we all know that politicians being exposed in lies is political kryptonite, or at least can be in some cases. So I just think it's a perfect thing to use. It's just such like a political open goal. It baffles me how so many of them have missed it, and whether it is they're just still terrified by those trans activist tactics of intimidation and the sort of cancel culture that exists still. But the tide has turned. Like we're not in 2020, 2021 anymore, and we're in sort of the remnants of that. So it's still bad, but there's definitely some shifts that have happened. But I think that it's at least a lot easier for politicians to be brave. But the likelihood, I mean, it's going to take a lot for this current government to do something about it. They've drunk the Kool-Aid.
The last thing I wanted to ask you, Sall, is for young women in Australia, for young female entrepreneurs who are now looking at your case and seeing what happened to you, and maybe they're galvanized by it, but maybe there are some who think, oh, maybe I will just stay quiet because this is what happens to people who have dissenting views on gender, or maybe I am wrong for having those gender critical convictions. What sort of advice would you give to them?
The other night, I was sitting on my balcony at the exact spot I was sitting when I got the Australian Human Rights Commission complaint. When I was contemplating what to do with the Australian Human Rights Commission complaint of like, if I say no to settling this here, it can very well escalate to court. I know at the time I was like, I was probably pregnant, and I was having a daughter. I knew I was having a daughter. I thought, like, if I don't stand up to this now, how will I ever teach her to stand up for herself? Because I will have run away because it seemed impossible, because it seemed too hard. And so that was a big motivator as well for me to be able to do it. And so the other night I was just sitting in that exact same place, and I was asking myself, like, do you regret it? Basically, like, would I do it all over again? And the answer is yes, I would. I will never, ever, ever regret standing up for what's right, what is right. I will never regret standing up for myself and for all women and girls, and freedom of speech and belief and reality, and for standing up against ideology. I'll never regret it. And even if I was to lose in the High Court, I'm still not going to regret it, because they can't take they can't take it away from me that I actually am right in reality. Like, a court can't turn these men into women. All they can do is validate a lie. So it's not like when people walked out of the court on Friday and was like, oh, it was a woman. No, it was like, okay, cool. We were dealing with a judiciary that is happy to lie. I sleep soundly at night knowing that I won't lie, and that I've proven to myself that I'm capable of standing up for myself. So if I was to say anything to any other women, I don't think this is a fight particularly that girls have to be in. I think this is for the adults in the group. I don't think girls should have to fight about this. The adults should fix this. But girls should talk, like, with the parents of girls, we should be fighting this. And if I could say anything to any of them, it's that it's dark sometimes and it's horrible, but I don't think that you will regret it. And if actually everybody stood up and said, I don't want this, it would make the fight really easy for me. Silence is full on it. So I think the more people that can speak up at this point, the better. It can't destroy everyone's lives. It can't mess celebrity up. It's just actually not possible. So it's power in numbers, without a doubt. And I would encourage more women to really just do something I don't think you're about.
Sall Grover, thank you for joining me.